Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of X's and O's. I'm Joe Thompson.
And I'm Isaac Denison.
We're going to have a whole conversation. We're going to have no commercial breaks. We're just going to go full through in today's episode. Later on, we're going to be discussing some of the free agents in the Major League Baseball that aren't signed yet. We got some big names out there: Bryce Harper, Manny Machado, Dallas Keuchel, and Craig Kimbrell. More on that later, but first we're going to keep it local. We'll just start with the NDSU men's and women's basketball team. Last weekend they had a pretty fun day of basketball playing against their rivals in South Dakota State.
Yeah, and it was unfortunately started by the women's team. It was another instance where the women's team got out to a good start, but then once the first quarter intermission hit, it just kind of went slowly, much more downhill for them. It's unfortunate to see what the NDSU women's team is doing, but luckily the second half of that doubleheader in the men's part of the day was a very interesting game. We got some plenty of things to talk about from that one.
You had the opportunity to go shoot highlights for the women's basketball game. So you're going to have, and you went to the men's game later, but talk to me about the women's game, what you saw as each quarter went through. Like you said, the first quarter went pretty well for the Bison, and then it was a slow downhill thing for them.
Yeah, so in the women's game in the first quarter, I was impressed with the way that they were kind of just shooting them like they were with South Dakota State shot for shot. They're one of the top teams, from my understanding, in the Summit League in the women's game, and they were, again, just like they showed in their previous home game last Wednesday against Oral Roberts. They were continually making shots in the first quarter and staying in the game, but ultimately the second quarter hit. They couldn't even score 10 points in that quarter, and they just kept allowing South Dakota State to score 20 in every quarter the rest of the way. Macy Miller, who you'll find on our newscast on Thursday, she had a very good game in that one for South Dakota State, and she shot 13 of 16 from the field. She had 30 points in the game. It's kind of hard to win, especially when you're facing a team that has a player like that. And also on NDSU's side, you had trouble getting your bigs involved. Emily Dietz and Riley Newdell had very difficult games for the women's team.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to just move ahead right along to the men's game, which was a very entertaining game, all said and done, despite NDSU losing on a bank shot buzzer beater.
Oh, my goodness.
But take me through that game half by half. Starting with the first half, NDSU came out smoking in that first half. They were they just turned it on to another level, hitting a bunch of threes.
And that was their game plan. I like what NDSU does on offense. I haven't had a chance to really see much of them in person this season, but I finally got to go to a game where I could actually just watch them and see what they were doing from an offensive standpoint. And I like that they're pretty much focusing on what analytics in modern basketball wants to focus on: layups and three-pointers. There was a point in the first half, the Bison shot the ball 27 times, and 17 of them were from three. And luckily, they were hitting a lot of those threes in the first half. That's what helped them out to that 9-point lead they had in the first half. It was not just a one-person effort. It wasn't Vinny Shaheed, what teams have been used to going against when they play against North Dakota State. It was a wide variety of options. It was Rocky Cruiser stepping out, knocking some down, and also Shaheed as well, and Jared Samuelson.
Sam Griesel.
Yep.
He hit a couple.
Yep. And it wasn't from just one spot on the court either. It's from straight on, from the wings, it's from the corners. They're hitting these shots. It was a very good sign to see them make these kinds of shots. These guys are going to be relied upon to continue to help your team win games in the future. They came in with a 5-game winning streak, and it looked for a while like they were going to extend that to 6.
Yeah. They had a 9-point lead going into halftime, but then it seemed like almost right away they struggled a little bit to get going in the second half, and as South Dakota State was leading with the top 2 scorers in the Summit League, with Mike Dahm, an NBA prospect, and Jenkins Jr. I can't remember his first name, but number 5, they both really carried the load.
He kept making five on SDSU, kept making shots that Steph Curry wouldn't even take.
Yeah.
He's making these ridiculous shots, but the Bison, though, give them credit, they were in a position early in the second half. They were up by 17 points.
Yeah.
That should usually, if you keep your foot on the accelerator and just keep running your stuff and keep making your shots, more often than not, a 17-point with about 16 minutes to go, it's usually you're sitting pretty. But unfortunately, SDSU give them credit. Yeah, Mike Dahm, as you mentioned, he was hard to block out for NDSU on the low block.
It seemed like their strategy early on in this game was to foul, like do a hack-a-shack with Mike Dahm. But the problem with that is Mike Dahm is a really good free throw shooter. Looking into the stats of this game, South Dakota State only missed one free throw. They've shot 20 of 21, which is just insane. They tried fouling him, but it's not going to work if he's just going to keep making them.
Well, yeah, I mean, and really the entire rest of the team also really stepped up at the line, and North Dakota State just wasn't as aggressive. They were getting into the lane, but they weren't drawing contact once they got there, not nearly at least as often as South Dakota State was, especially in the second half, I thought.
Yeah, and then towards the end of the game, NDSU had a bunch of opportunities to really just sort of make the game virtually out of reach for South Dakota State. They had several opportunities to make dagger free throws and missed them.
They had namely two opportunities. I think the first one was Tyson Ward that would have put the Bison up by 4 with like 5 seconds to go. And smartly, I was calling for this from the stands. After Ward missed that free throw, I was calling for the team to foul because you don't want them to tie the game on a 3. You'd rather them shoot the 2 free throws and then just inbound the ball, make your free throws, and just keep playing the foul game. So they did that, and SDSU did make both their free throws. And then the Bison got it back. They had to inbound it to Rocky Cruiser, actually, after their first and second options were taken away. And he's still a decent shooter.
Yeah.
He has a good stroke in terms of like a general jump shot, but he did make the first of his 2 free throws. But what really killed them would have put him up by 3 if he made that second one, and he didn't. And
Jenkins Jr. pulled it down.
Yep, the Jackrabbits grabbed the rebound. They got it to 5 and black, and he just stepped up.
He had plenty of
Nailed
space
it
to
from
shoot
half
that
court.
shot. I'm going to be honest. I get they were they wanted to stay close but not foul, but they gave, in my opinion, they gave him way too much space. They gave him so much room to just run up the court and shoot that shot.
I think if I remember correctly, I just remember seeing him run up the court, and I'm just hoping that they don't touch him, because if you touch him, the Jackrabbits are in the double bonus. They'd be shooting 2 free throws, so you don't want them. I guess in that sense, maybe then you would want them if you didn't know that the 3 was going to go in. Maybe you could have then, but you still wouldn't want to do that in a normal sense.
On top of that there wasn't even really someone trying to contest that shot. Like Rocky Cruiser tried, but it wasn't really. He didn't really go for it. In my personal opinion, he just kind of was like, and just kind of tried to just put a hand up there to maybe.
Sometimes
that
is all that takes, and you just have to live with the result in this situation. It's a tough way to lose in any setting.
Credit to him, he hit a heck of a shot. But we're gonna move ahead to another thing that happened basketball-wise this past weekend. It was the NBA All-Star game, All-Star weekend. They had the USA versus the World, the Rising Stars game. Kyle Kuzma won MVP of that. He had, I believe, 35 points.
Something like that. He had a pretty good outing in that one.
I always really enjoyed the Rising Stars Challenge with the first and second year players. They get an opportunity to showcase their skills, and it's basically them previewing some of the players on those teams who could end up being all-stars.
Well, yeah, I think that's what the intended purpose was.
That's kind of what it is.
Yeah, and we've seen obviously this event evolve over the years. Instead of just straight up rookies versus sophomores and kind of intermingling them, they're trying to make it appeal to more of like a global audience and try to highlight the best of what the United States has to offer, putting them all on the same team versus like the players drafted that represent other countries that are not America. I kind of like that aspect.
Yeah, I always liked that too. If it wasn't just like Shaq drafts one team, Charles Barkley drafts another.
Man,
they did that for a couple years.
I remember that concept.
Chuck dominated Shaq both times because Shaq wasn't really drafting that well, I guess. But I really enjoyed those games. They're always kind of fun. It's basically a mini all-star game for first and second year players, because you never know who out of that field could become an all-star.
Oh, for certain.
Like, I think because basically Luka Doncic, he could have been an all-star.
Marvin Bagley,
Kyle
some of those
Kuzma.
other guys. Yep.
Was Lonzo Ball in that game? I
don't know. I didn't watch
that's
the game. I wish I did, so I could answer that question properly, but he might not have. Yeah. I don't know. I'm sorry for that. I usually have these answers, but I don't. I'm sorry.
And then we'll go ahead into the Saturday, which is personally my favorite part of
Yeah.
NBA All-Star
Yeah, I'd
Weekend, because
say.
you got the skills competition, you got the three-point contest, and the dunk contest, which has always been my personal favorite. You watched NBA All-Star Saturday night, and take me through each competition, starting with the first one that they do, the skills competition.
I like the way that they've reformatted the skills competition. It's not just a guard thing anymore. I like that more players are included in this event.
Like big men.
Right, exactly, and it really turned out to be a great investment the first year they did it when Karl Anthony Towns of the Timberwolves won the event. It was the first year they allowed bigs to be in the event. They had at that time they had Karl Anthony Towns and DeMarcus Cousins both participate.
Yeah.
Now you got guys that, and also Kristaps Porzingis won that event as well. But it's not just what used to be a Steve Nash and a Dwayne Wade kind of event in the past. It's grown to much more of a positionless event, much like the NBA is growing to be more positionless.
Yeah.
And I like that. Jason Tatum, who's he won. He ultimately did win the event, but it wasn't like an easy thing for him.
Yeah.
He had to get by on a few close calls in order to be able to advance throughout the night. But I do like the way that they format that event.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there. I like that they include both guards and big men in that competition. There's always that one analyst who's like, there's no way a big man would win this event. And the two big men won the first two skills competitions when they implemented this thing. So it just kind of proves that you don't need to be a guard to be able to pass the ball, to be able to shoot.
Absolutely not, especially nowadays.
It's just great. But taking to the three-point contest.
That was definitely the best, in my opinion, that was definitely the best event of the night, easily.
Because you had your Steph Currys, you had your, who else was it? Yeah, I know Steph Curry was in it, but who else was in it?
So, and from
what you can remember.
Well, and also not only was that a whole Steph Curry's in it, but they also tried to get a lot of in terms of the 3-point competition and the dunk contest. They tried to get a lot of Carolina area connections because they had both Curry brothers participate in the event. They also had Kemba Walker, who plays for the Charlotte Hornets in North Carolina. They also had Danny Green, who's on the Toronto Raptors and went to the University of North Carolina. And they had a few other guys that had area ties. And I do like that. But and also getting Steph Curry in that competition, definitely creating the star appeal, which in my opinion is kind of losing itself from All-Star Weekend. We're kind of seeing much more, especially much more recently. Obviously, this isn't a new issue that these star players aren't participating in things like the 3-point contest and the dunk contest like they used to back in the 80s. But I do like that at least. We saw, Steph Curry and Seth Curry and some of these other, and Dirk Nowitzki, future Hall of Famer, participate in this event. But at the same time, I absolutely wasn't expecting Joe Harris to win that event. Did you think that Joe Harris of the Brooklyn Nets was going to unseat Steph Curry and win this event? I didn't think so.
I'm going to be completely honest. I didn't even know who Joe Harris was.
There you go.
Because I don't follow the NBA as much as I used to, but. Well, seeing a relatively unknown player win an event like that, that's going to be huge for them.
Joe Harris used to be a space creator for LeBron James when he was on the Cleveland Cavaliers, and now he's part of that Nets offense that just loves to shoot threes and not much else. And so he's that's pretty much who Joe Harris is if you didn't know who he was prior to Saturday night. Yeah,
but now take me through the dunk contest. They had some names like rising stars, Dennis Smith Jr., some Diallo who ultimately
ended up winning. I don't think either of us had heard of him prior to him winning the dunk contest. They had Dennis Smith Jr. They had
John Collins.
Yes, very athletic forward for the Atlanta Hawks.
And then who else?
And then whoever the fourth participant was, it'll probably come to us later on as we talk about this. But again, it was a situation where the dunk contest was just pretty underwhelming. They
had one or two cool ones that you saw on Twitter. And
the guy who won the competition, easily the best dunk was when he jumped over Shaq and did the Vince Carter honey dip. He was hanging on the rim by his elbow.
And then showed off the Superman under his. He cut his jersey down the middle and then pulled it apart and showed the Superman logo.
That was easily the best one, and I wasn't expecting that. That was amazing.
It got a 50, didn't it?
I think it had to have. Yeah.
Not everybody can jump over Shaq.
Considering all the presentation that it had and everything that went into that, there was also another dunk that where he pulled out all this gear. He had some flight gear. He had the Wright brothers plane, a replica of a Wright brothers plane.
Yeah, I did see that.
And he jumped over it. He dunked it, but he also I think broke some of the wings off the side when he dunked the ball. He did kind of graze his feet and kind of broke a little bit of the plane, but it was still a good dunk.
Yeah.
I don't know. So you can't be too picky with it. It's not going to be Zach LaVine versus Aaron Gordon every year.
Jordan versus Wilkins.
Certainly, yeah. You can't expect greatness every single year from this event, but overall, I mean, there were a lot of instances, especially with Dennis Smith Jr.'s attempts, where you're trying these, grandiose dunks and you're not connecting, and it's kind of taking the excitement value out of it, but you can't be treated as something perfect every single year. I do get that. It's just unfortunate to see the event kind of trail off like it has in the last few years.
That's kind of the biggest problem with the dunk contest. There are some years where it's great, and some years like the previous two where it's just been really sort of lacking. We got a taste of what the 2016 dunk contest was going to be when Zach LaVine first won the dunk contest in 2015, where he pulled off some amazing dunks. That
was another good battle, him and Victor Oladipo back in 15, and then he came back and defended his title in that awesome matchup. If you haven't seen that dunk contest since 2016, YouTube that thing.
Got a bunch of free throw line dunks, air chair, putting it under both legs.
Oh my goodness. Jumping over the mascot, oh my goodness, that was a fantastic dunk contest. Please YouTube that. Do yourself something good and YouTube that.
But we'll go ahead to the actual game itself. I didn't get a chance to watch it.
I don't think either of us ended up watching it, but I
heard
know
it was very competitive.
Yeah, I do know that Giannis Antetokounmpo's team, who I kind of thought that when the teams who each LeBron and Giannis drafted, I kind of thought that Giannis's team was definitely inferior. I thought that LeBron's team was absolutely better and more balanced. I thought it was pretty much just Giannis and Steph Curry that were going to lead that team. But I think Giannis's team had a pretty substantial lead for most of the game, but LeBron and his group came back later in the game.
Yeah, kind of talk to me about this new format that they have. For years and years and years and years, it's always been East versus West. And in recent years, before they switched it to what it is now, it has been historically the West that just continued to dominate the Eastern Conference because overall, talent-wise, the Western Conference just had more stars, more competitive style of play. The Eastern Conference players, Western Conference players have always been more competitive than the East. East, they had stuff because it's LeBron. They have LeBron, they have Dwayne Wade, stuff like that. But within the last 2 years, they switched it up where teams are intermixed. They get two captains.
Yep, it's kind of like an old schoolyard style of picking teams.
So you got LeBron, you got Team LeBron. It's going to be Team LeBron until he retires, and then
because I think these are based off. Aren't these based off the amount of votes that they get in their respective conferences?
It might be. I'm not sure.
It would make sense because both LeBron. I mean, he's LeBron James and Giannis Antetokounmpo is the.
Probably the Steph Curry.
Yeah, probably. I think I would say Giannis is the most up and coming player now in the Eastern Conference. So it makes sense if he got the most votes, and that's the way they determine it.
Mm-hmm. And then those two are named the captains, and then first they pick the starters, and then they go into the reserves and pick the reserves, and then they form their own team. Because of that, the last two All-Star games have been very competitive. The one last year, Team Curry had a last-second shot to try and win the game, and unfortunately Steph Curry missed it. But it was competitive throughout the entire game. And then this year, like you said, Team Giannis had a substantial lead throughout the game, and then LeBron came back and won. I think that's a very good thing for the All-Star game NBA All-Star game as a whole, make it more competitive because, like I said previously, it was just the West just blowing out the East.
I think almost even, still now, I think the West definitely has much more star power than the East. But I do like this intermixing of conferences and players being represented from different conferences playing in the All-Star game on the same team. I do like that aspect considering, the way that the star players in the NBA are now spread out. Yeah. It's still much more West centric in terms of having representation among the elites of the NBA. Just see the Golden State Warriors accounting for plenty of the West All-Stars year in and year out, especially recently.
Absolutely. But I think we're going to go ahead and shift gears now to Major League Baseball. If you're not too aware of, spring training is just starting to get underway. Most of the players have reported to their
pitchers
respective
and catchers
areas.
Reported last week for most of the teams.
Yeah, and then as we go day by day, more and more players are going to start to show up and starting to get loose.
And most teams are starting spring training games as early as this Friday.
Yeah, which is pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to focus a lot on right now some of the free agents that have yet to be signed, specifically 4 major star players. Bryce Harper, right fielder, who used to play for his whole career with the Nationals.
Could still come back there, but you never know with these kind of situations.
And then you got Manny Machado, shortstop / third baseman. Played most of his career with the Orioles, then was traded at the trade deadline to the Dodgers. Then Dallas Keuchel, starting pitcher for the Astros, won a World Series with them a couple of seasons ago. And then dynamite closer Craig Kimbrell, who was a rock-solid closer for the Red Sox who just won the World Series this year. Talk me through those four specific free agents that have yet to be signed by a team.
So I think what the deal is, I don't know what exactly Dallas Keuchel's situation is, but I think with the other 3 players you mentioned, what they wanted from a team this offseason, I think is just too much.
Yeah.
Was probably initially too much for what teams really want to try to offer players now. We're seeing a lot more now with these, star players, unless there are these outliers, obviously every offseason, but I think what we're seeing much more now, teams are much less willing to hand out these long, high-dollar contracts like they used to. Because, like Alex Rodriguez and those situations, I think have...
Same thing with Giancarlo Stanton a few years ago.
Right. I think those kind of contracts are now, with the way that those end up working out many years down the road, I think teams are becoming much more wise in terms of giving out those contracts just because they don't want to have to deal with these, paying so much money to a player that's like 36 years old and may not be producing at that level that he was 10 years ago.
Yeah, when you go into the specifics, I believe Bryce Harper and Manny Machado won't take anything less than an 8-year deal.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Craig Kimbrell, he wants a 5-year deal as a closing pitcher, which is really, really risky.
Considering
not every closer can be Mariano Rivera.
Right. I think it's also something to consider that Craig Kimbrell is also in his early 30s.
Yeah.
All these contracts, it's guaranteed money as well in
Yeah.
baseball. There's no non-guaranteed money in baseball. Once you sign something, you're going to get that money one way or another.
But they're obviously the teams that are most likely to sign guys like Harper, Machado. Those are going to be like teams with the highest payroll. So the Yankees, Dodgers, Red Sox.
You'd think. However, there are also plenty of teams like the Chicago White Sox and the San Diego Padres that are also interested in acquiring those players because they have much more money on their budget to spend compared to some of those other higher market teams. The Chicago White Sox, they got a lot of young players on their roster, and they have plenty of space to be able to pay some of those higher profile players. So that's why you've seen the Chicago White Sox in talks with Bryce Harper and Manny Machado, at least in certain, because they want a franchise cornerstone. That's the one thing that the White Sox don't have. They've been kind of mired in last place for plenty of years now in the AL Central, either last place or middle of the pack in the AL Central. They haven't really had a great team in plenty of years now since they won the Central in, I believe, 2008.
Yeah, I think that was the last time they were truly competitive.
Yep. So they want to try to get back to competing again because it's kind of been a down couple years now for the AL Central ever since the Royals won their World Series. They want to try to capitalize on that and get a franchise cornerstone. They seem to be willing to pay the money for a guy like Bryce Harper who's shown plenty of great signs over the years, over his young career with the Nationals, as well as Manny Machado. They seem to be willing, just a matter of whether or not the players and their agents will comply to whatever demands they have.
Can you sort of try and give a guess on who you think is going to sign Guys like Machado and Harper specifically?
Well, and I don't know exactly. This is all still a bunch of speculation, but you really have to hope that these deals get done before the season starts.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, it's a situation where if you're missing time in the regular season because these teams won't budge, that's not good for you as a player. I think at some point in time, like any of these high-profile players that haven't been signed yet, should just try to, if they're still interested in obviously playing out the rest of their prime, they should just try to get something now while they at least have teams interested. And, of course, you have to be thinking long-term, but at some point, if teams are offering you something short, may as well just take it. Yeah. If it's like a 1-year contract for like however many $1 million they want, and just so that you have job security for 1 year and try again next year, maybe that's the way they go if it ends up getting to that point. I don't see it happening though, but I really, really hope that these players try to find a way to get something done before the regular season starts in late March.
I think one of the biggest things you have to look at is, what was I going to say? I kind of lost my train of thought there. The biggest thing is you got to look at what some teams need. Like the Yankees, I don't think they obviously have serious inquiries about getting Manny Machado, but they don't really need him.
They've made moves that suggest they really don't. I remember they, early in the offseason cycle, I think they got like Troy Tulowitzki or some high-profile level shortstop.
Didi Gregorius,
and they also have him already on the roster.
A pretty good player. You don't need it's very rare that you can just add superstar after superstar after superstar and just expect it to work like magic, because it's not guaranteed that those players are going to mesh very well. Manny Machado has sort of had issues in the past with being with like some character issues. He's been seen doing some dirty stuff, getting into fights. So teams might not be interested in doing that stuff at all, like even getting anywhere near him, despite his talent, despite how good he is as a player. It always comes down to character issues. Yeah,
and I think one team we've also failed to mention throughout this process, the Philadelphia Phillies.
Yeah.
They've been aggressively trying to get their team back to what they used to be in the late 2000s, early 2010s.
Yeah.
They've been acquiring a lot of talent, and they've been in firm discussions with both Harper and Machado. That's one thing I wanted to try to bring back into this discussion.
Yeah.
They're both, I think they're probably the leading candidate for Bryce Harper. Not sure about Machado, but they've both been in. Both those players have been in conversation with the Philadelphia Phillies.
And then, like, going back to what you said about the Padres just offered huge deals to both Machado and Bryce Harper today. That was one of the pretty, not major news stories, but it's been pretty well documented around. It's been around the talks when we were looking this up before the show. So it's going to be really interesting. I've also heard stuff that the Giants and Harper have been engaging in talks. Even the Twins were engaging in talks with Bryce Harper.
Hey, I mean, the Twins didn't really make too many aggressive moves. They signed a lot of short one-year contracts in their free agency moves, and they still have plenty of money left over when they were paying Joe Mauer $28 million the last few years. Maybe.
I think the biggest thing you have to look at is the Twins. They've been notoriously cheap when it comes to signing players.
Yeah.
They've never been a team to go out and get a superstar player in their prime. The last big contract they gave out was obviously the Joe Mauer one. It started off well, but then it just, as the years
bilateral leg weakness, probably.
As the years went on, it started to look more and more.
The fictitious ailment known as bilateral leg weakness probably ended up derailing Joe Mauer.
Just steady increase in injuries to Joe Mauer really sort of derailed his rise as a superstar to just your mid-tier, your mid-level player. Wasn't
financially the best investment. It turned out as the years went on in that 8-year contract.
Eight or 9 years. Just pretty pedestrian, if I do say so. Although Mauer is a Hall of Fame level player, not first ballot, but a Hall of Famer one day.
Possibly. That's a debate for another day, though.
Yeah, but I think the Twins, their biggest issue is they always try to sign cheap talent, mediocre talent, in hopes of in a famed attempt at being competitive. But the thing is, when you sign mediocre talent, you're going to be mediocre. And that was what we saw last year with the Twins. They made the playoffs the previous season before last, made it to the wild card game. Unfortunately, lost to the Yankees again. But then they went out and signed guys like Logan Morrison, Zach Duke, Addison Reed, some players that played well, but weren't like high enough level.
I see where you're coming from.
To save a few bucks and basically fill a need briefly, and then it just fizzled out.
I didn't mind those signings at the time because they were very low risk.
Yeah.
I mean, they're short-term contracts. If they work out, great. If they don't work out, there's not much financial obligation to those deals. But I thought that I was like many other Twins fans. I thought that those signings would be needle pushers to push them further in the American League. But with the strides that the rest of the top teams in the American League made last year, it just with the way also that the Twins' schedule worked out, it just didn't ultimately end up working out. But I don't know. I think it's not impossible, obviously. I think, and Bryce Harper's had a bunch of mystery teams that have been interested in him.
Yeah.
Who knows if the Twins are one of those mystery teams?
It's not out of the question that it could happen. It's just whether or not the owners want it to happen. They're always scared of signing superstar players to big deals because you'd never know if they're going to work out or not.
And that's basically the whole sentiment around this Manny Machado, Bryce Harper stuff.
Yeah.
You don't. It's just a risk reward. It's just a risk reward analysis here. What are you getting versus how much are you giving up to get them?
The way I see it, having Bryce Harper is nice, but the thing that's been derailing the Twins for so many years is pitching. They've had issues. That was one of their big issues last year, both in the starting rotation and the bullpen. Yep. Other than Jose Barrios, they didn't really have much. Irvin Santana kind of went back to crappy Irvin Santana.
And it didn't also help that he was suspended for half the year because of steroid use, which was definitely unfortunate for the Twins last season.
Same thing with Jorge Polanco. He was suspended for PD use, and then Miguel Sano, he had issues. But I think when it comes down to it, I think Bryce Harper would be nice.
Yeah.
But getting Dallas Keuchel, an ace, a former Cy Young winner, I think that would be a much better deal to go after for the Twins than say ruin their potential dynamite outfield that they currently have with Max Kepler, Byron Buxton, and Eddie Rosario. So we'll see what happens.
And we can also get into more specific details surrounding the Twins and other major league teams as the regular season approaches.
Begins to unfold. Well, I don't really have too much else to say.
I think we've covered our bases. No pun intended, I guess. Maybe it was. Who knows? But I think we've covered our bases pretty well in this segment, especially with the Harper and Machado happenings.
Yeah. But that's going to do it for us today. Thanks to you guys so much for watching. Until next time, I'm Joe Thompson.
And I'm Isak Dinesen.
Have a good night.